Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. And as is our want, I'm going to go ahead and start with the news of the week in the solar industry. Then we're going to pop into some events, some of the webinars or events that are taking place. And then also we're going to have a specific topic that we usually focus a few minutes on. Today, we're going to be focusing that on standalone systems, specifically systems offered by Sol-Ark, which is one of the popular standalone systems. And I've asked Don Meyer to join in since he's got a system and he can tell us fact versus fiction, so we can find out if it's all marketing hype or if they're really good systems. So that's always good. So this is the news for the week of October 8th. And the Yellow Bud solar array, which is located just southwest of Columbus, Ohio, between the big burgs of Circleville and Washington Courthouse, in case you're wondering, just opened up this week a 274 megawatt, 2,000 acre solar farm. Is developed by National Grid Renewables, and now the National Grid Renewables is claiming this particular event, this farm is going to generate about $90 million into the local economy through salaries, through taxes, as well as payments to landowners. So just to show a little bit of what the at least purported economic benefits of these solar farms are. Now, this solar farm, all of the power production has been purchased by Amazon. So this is going to meet some of their portfolio standards. And the reason I thought this was important, not only because it's Ohio, and of course, Ohio is the heart of it all, but this array is one of a lot of large systems that's in this Western Ohio region. As of January 1st of this year, only about 450 megawatts of solar farms had been operational in Ohio, but there were another 6,000 megawatts that have already been approved or are in some phase of construction. So there's a really huge building boom of solar farms in Western Ohio. Now, before we all pat ourselves on the back, Ohio is playing a lot of catch up in this. Nationwide, about 26% of all of our solar or all of our energy is produced through renewables, but in Ohio, it's only about 4%. And Ohio ranks first in wind turbine manufacturing. It also has the largest solar panel manufacturing facility in the US, but it still ranks about 40th nationwide as far as generating capacity for the state. Western Ohio is attractive to developers largely because there's a lot of transmission capacity that's available. It has flat, relatively cheap farmland or land that's available. And also it's part of the PJM regional operating system, which serves large population centers like New York and Chicago. So it's really poised quite nicely as this latest boomlet of solar farm development. Now, it's estimated that between now and 2030, we're going to have to see about 700,000 solar jobs created. And pretty much everybody's wringing their hands wondering where these folks are going to be coming from. There are currently, a lot of one of the biggest issues in solar at the moment is finding people to meet the current demand for the workforce. So we're starting to see a lot of the tasks that are associated, especially with the larger systems, becoming automated using robotic type techniques. One of the first of these were automated pile drivers, these systems that would pound the posts into the ground for large ground-mounted solar arrays. They are operated by GPS. It's all pretty much automated. But now we're starting to see automated lift systems that are coming in to lift the panels into place during construction. We're seeing equipment tracking systems, not only on site to monitor and control all of the various components as they're being installed, but also in the procurement process to track these. Robotics are being used in panel inspection so that you can look at each of these. And you think about solar panels, let's say an array like the one that I just mentioned, Yellow Bud, they might have tens of thousands of solar panels, each one needing to be inspected, each one needing to be cleaned. And so these repetitive tasks are really ripe for robotics. Speaking panel cleaning is another one, and vegetation control. There's companies out there that are running these automatic vegetation control for the ground-mounted systems. Now, state of Michigan is poised to adopt House Bill 4759, as well as Senate Bill 271. And basically, these bills are geared towards making Michigan the next state that's going to be mandating 100% clean energy in the coming future. These bills say that by 2030, Michigan should be at 60%, and then 2040, 100%. Now, there's some recent analysis as to what this is going to do to the economy of a state like Michigan, and analysis by Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council, as well as the Five Lakes Energy Company. They put together a study, and they found that it'll actually create about 160,000 new jobs within the state. This transition away from fossil fuels will generate about a 2.5% higher gross domestic product, or GDP, within the state by 2050, and will actually lower energy costs to the consumer. So that all sounds good news. Hopefully we'll see it all pan out that way. And FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, just recently released their numbers for the first half of 2023. And those numbers show us a few things here. As far as new generating capacity in the first half of this year, natural gas accounted for about 45% of all of the new generation. Solar was 40%, wind 14%, and of course, notably absent, as they have been probably for the last decade, coal and nuclear. So zeros on those two, big goose eggs. So what does this take us to? That was new generating capacity. So in today's grid, essentially 44% of the generating capacity is natural gas. So it's still the big dog. Coal down to about 16%. So there's still coal power plants, but most of them are scheduled to be retired here over the next 5 or 6 years. Wind is 12%, roughly. Nuclear, 8%. Hydro about 8%, and solar about 7%. So that is where the grid is currently operating, but that doesn't really give you the whole picture because we're in these transition phases. If we look at everything that's in the pipeline at the moment, well, of all of the projects that have been approved for future development over the next few years, solar represents about 66% of all of the upcoming projects, wind about 20%, natural gas down to about 9%, and hydro, according to FERC, at about 4%. So 90% of all of the new systems that are in the pipeline currently are renewable energy over the next few years. So this transition is escalating. And that's the news from the solar industry. So does anybody else have anything they want to add to this this recap, things you've heard about? I know Chris had just mentioned he had heard there was some sort of subsidy system going in place in one of the states or one of the utilities where they're providing batteries to homeowners to accelerate that. So I don't have any details on that yet. Anybody have anything to add? All right, so I'll jump into the announcements here that have come across my desk, and I don't want to pretend like I've done a great deal of research on this. I've basically recapped all the emails that I get, so this is not exhaustive, but it's there's a lot of them out there if you're interested in spending your day on Zoom calls or watching webinars. So October 10th, that's today, right after this call, you can go and see what Duke Energy wants to tell you about how resilient they are in the climate crisis. I always take these with a little bit of grain of salt because I suspect it's a lot of corporate patting themselves on the back or marketing PR. Also later today, 2 p.m., safe EV deployment. This is through IREC, and these are generally discussions, so they go on for a bit of time, and you have the ability to feed back into this system. So that's this afternoon. Then October 12th at 2 p.m., the Solar Energy Industries Association, is having a webinar on worker emotional well-being. So that's coming up in a couple of days. And on the 12th, it is generative AI for renewable energy. And actually, this one seems interesting to me. I've actually registered for that, as if anyone cares. And on October 19th, 2 p.m., how to sell solar in a changing marketplace. So if your solar sales are interested in that. 24th at 3 p.m., battery energy storage systems. And this is really focused on capabilities as far as the grid operators are concerned. This is from Wood Mackenzie. So this may be large system battery storage for integration into utility. So that may be something that you just want to see how that works. I suspect you're not running a utility. Then on the 25th at 2 p.m., and all these times are Eastern time, combining batteries with building management systems. This particular webinar is being put on by Honeywell. So we'll see how that works out. And then on the 26th at noon, Wood Mackenzie has one on optimizing land use. So dual land use for large utility scale systems and what's on the horizon there. 26th at 2, there's Savant Energy Systems. And this is part of a trend of proprietary systems. So Savant is manufacturer. And I tried to look up, I wasn't sure if this is a DC coupled or AC coupled system. I couldn't tell from their marketing stuff, but I suspect it's a DC coupled system. And then this one kind of I found a little bit funny. It's Everseal non-metal flashing, and it's all about flashing and bitumen and incorporating it into it. And when I was looking at the descriptions, there was I think they're overselling it here. It says, join experts Brett and Brad as they delve into the historic development of composition single shingle roof attachments, highlighting the absence of metal flashings in the early stages. We will trace the evolution of metal flashings and discuss associated warranties. So this is something only a roofing flashing person might love, but you'll know everything you ever wanted to know about metal flashing. And on the 9th, 2 p.m., expanding into commercial and industrial sales. So if you've been doing residential and now you're interested in getting into commercial, this is a webinar that's available to you. And then, of course, as always, with our shameless plug, there's upcoming online courses as well as face-to-face and hybrid courses at solarpvtraining.com, which is what we do. So I invite you to take a look there. And those are the announcements that I have for this week. Does anybody have anything else they want to add to that? To our number, I'll give you just a second there. Okay, so I'm going to just jump in and we'll get into our topic of discussion today. The specific topic here was standalone systems, and I get quite a number of calls from folks who are interested in what's a good standalone system and what would you recommend. And I don't have a lot of experience with this other than putting together solar generators. I'm about to embark on putting in a standalone system at Eastern West Virginia Community College, and I thought I would use Sol-Ark, and so I asked my friend Don Meyer to let me know if there's anything I should be aware of, which then led me to think about, well, why don't we have a discussion about this system and what it does, what options are there, what it costs, things like that, in case you're looking at a standalone system, or even apparently a lot of these are DC coupled systems as well. Now, to my thinking, or at least from what I've read and what I've heard from folks, the two major large-scale residential standalone systems that are out there are put out by Outback Power and Sol-Ark. So I thought I would ask at this point, does anybody know, or have I missed a large system that's being installed quite a lot in the world of standalone that anyone's aware of? Let you jump in and plug something that you've used or that you like. Give me just a second. Nope. All right, so I must be right. So I thought I would focus on Sol-Ark here first. And let me just double check. Don, are you on board with us here at this point?
I'm on if you can hear me, Jay.
Hey, I can hear you and I can see you. That's good. All right.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump in, but we'll just try and go back and forth. And if I say something that you disagree with, or you want to add to it, or you've got a good joke, just pop in and let me know.
I know how to do that.
Okay, great. Now, the product line that I was looking at from Sol-Ark that they have available, it looks like in the residential marketplace, there's a 5 kW system that outputs at 120 volts. There's a 5 kW system that outputs at 240 volts. And then there are a few others, the 8 kW, that's 240 output, 12 kW, and 15 kW. All of those are 240. My assumption is that those 240s can also be operated as DC coupled systems, whereas the 120, because it's outputting at 120 versus the 240 the grid operates at, it must just be a standalone system. Now, Don, you had mentioned when we spoke earlier that some of these have outdoor rated cases, some have indoor.
I think the whole, I believe their whole line has both outdoor and indoor. I bought some of the 12Ks and some of the 15s, and I know one of them at least was outdoor rated. I didn't realize that until after I got it. But the way they described it to me is that they have an outdoor set of cases and an indoor set, and everything else is the electronics.
Okay.
As far as the changes or the differences between the models. And I think they also have a couple commercial models too now, like a 30 and a 60.
Yeah, in fact, I've got some got the spec sheets on those too. Thought I'd show a couple of pictures here. This to me looked like a relatively small system. I'm not quite sure about the batteries, because if there were 4 of them, I'd assume those are 12 volts in series, but there are 5 of them. So I'm a little confused. Maybe they're just very small 48 volt batteries hooked up there. I think the system is pretty agnostic as to what battery you use with it. Is that right, Don?
It is. I've hooked them up both with lithium ion and with AMG, or what, I never get the initials right.
Yeah, absorbed glass mat. Yeah,
absorbed glass mat. So yeah, they do say that their systems are intentionally battery agnostic, and that they sometimes do have specials partnered with different batteries. So not the same battery company every time. I've seen 2 or 3 different deals that they've offered before.
Yeah, and this is one of the few systems, when you're talking about a residential system, that really can still use lead acid batteries, because the Enphase, you've got to use their battery bank because it's an AC coupled system, and it requires having those inverters built into the system, so it converts back from DC to AC. Solar Edge is, I believe, and I don't have this verified, but I think their battery is just an LG Chem battery with the Solar Edge name on it, but they're trying to market that as a proprietary package. If you're dealing with Tesla, their battery's AC coupled, so you got to use theirs. So one of these like Sol-Ark or Outback, you can just go out and buy whatever the best battery deal you can find. And as long as it's 48 volts, I think they all operate at 48 volt, then you're going to be able to package in. We had mentioned, or Don had mentioned, the commercial systems, and they do have a 30 kW commercial 3-phase, 208 volt 3-phase system, and then they have a 60 kW 480 volt 3-phase system. So this would be pretty large, and I'm thinking, well, gosh, what situation are you going to need something like that? But in past discussions, Devin down in Trinidad saying, listen, we have a lot of commercial enterprises that are out there that cannot connect to the grid. Or Don, we were talking about Puerto Rico with their rebuilding after Hurricane Maria that devastated the grid there. So I could see there being a lot of applications, I assume. So if we look at some of the spec sheets here, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here on the Sol-Ark system, it's 30K output, maximum AC output, but it can bring up to almost a 40 kW input. So the array there can be that with the inverter load ratio. If my math is right, in that about a 1.3. It's probably not a true conversion that way, but it's close enough. And you can have maximum voltage input of about 500 volts coming in from your system, startup of 150, 4 MPPTs on this particular system. That seems to be, when we say 4 MPPTs, it basically means 4 strings coming into the inverter, each one independently monitored and corrected for changing conditions. So, and I guess you can put in 2 strings for each of those MPPTs. So eight strings. And if you exceed 8 strings, you're going to have to go with another inverter, a second inverter there. So that's just an example of the commercial options, but I wanted to kind of focus our attention here on residential systems. And I thought I'd throw up the concept map here, or diagram, of the 5 kW system. And as I look at this, it looks like you could actually have 10.4 kW of array, which is quite a high ratio for input versus output. And it looks like they have 2 MPPT controllers. So you could come in with 2 into the inverter, and then this is single phase only, but then the output is going to be 4.8 kW at 120 volts. So this is obviously a standalone system. And then let me see, what else was I going to ask? I know, Don, I was going to ask you something on this. I don't remember what. Okay. So you got any comments on this? I don't think this is the kind of system you have, right? You have the larger systems, or the 240 system?
Yeah, is this the 5K? That's what I was just trying to see what.
Yeah, this is the 5 kW,
Standalone?
120 volt.
120, yeah. Yeah, I've got the 8s and 12s, and I think 115.
Okay, and these things are all generated compatible. Oh, I just remembered. Yeah, the this one, it wouldn't be a factor, but on the coupled systems, you'd have to have an auto transfer switch or some way to disconnect from the grid. And that is all built into this inverter. Is that correct?
That's right. That's all built in. I've got one off-grid system and the rest are on-grid, and it's all built in as far as when the power goes out. I've been here in the back room, and the power's gone out in the neighborhood, and I've never even known it. But it's all, we didn't have to buy the separate transfer switch, was the benefit from having this system.
Now, this is the 8K, and I think this is maybe one of which you have. And it looks like, again, they're just showing 2 MPPTs coming in. So maybe it's, I think when we look at the wiring diagram, you'll see ports for 4, but I think maybe only 2 are active. For the larger systems, all 4 might be active. And it's showing that you have 8 kW continuous, 16 kW peak. Does that tie in? And peak meaning what? Surge demand?
Surge demand. That mainly means, for example, here in the house it's not as relevant, but at the farm, if the heat or the air conditioning kicks on when the motor first starts up, it will spike then. If you run the dryer is electric, it'll spike for then. Or if you have auxiliary heat, so that it's mainly when the motors kick on, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just saw a note in the chat that they're saying there are 2 strings for each of those MPPTs. So I guess that's what they're showing with the 2 arrays, the 2 panels coming in. So you could actually have 4 strings on this system if you needed. Now, what's been your experience with these things so far? I mean, as far as reliability, functionality, ease of install?
Reliability's been very good. Haven't had any problems with any of the hardware. Some of the software issues probably are a little more operator error. I think I mentioned to you, for example, if on the off-grid system in the winter, when the heat's on and every so often the generator has to kick on to recharge the batteries. When the heat would kick on too, it would change the gears in the generator, which would cause the voltage to flicker. It would flip outside the range for kicking off the inverters. just a normal safety feature, but then we kick them all off for 5 minutes and hit to put them back on. I was able to fix that fairly easily with just changing the range that it was acceptable for the voltage. I've had very good experience with them. I've called them on Sundays. They're not open 24 hours a day, but they are open 7 days a week, and they are pretty helpful to people who are not, everyday professional installers. I would consider myself a knowledgeable novice, and they're able to help walk through any different problem I would have. And again, it's mostly all been software related and setting up the options, and not so much hardware related.
Now, these guys, aren't they headquartered in Texas? Is that right? So they would meet they'd meet the American made requirement there for the act, as long as it's grid tied.
I think so. Well, even if it's not grid tied, I still think you get the credits.
Yeah, you're right, because I was thinking Rex, but the tax credits should still be applicable, at least for that. But then
Yes.
for the inverter stuff, then you've got the panel issue and the metal issue for your racking. So
yeah, I think they should qualify. I was trying to look that up ahead of time. I know that they are a Texas group. They were founded by Energy or Defense Department and veterans, and everything is designed in Texas. I know they've got a big plant down there. When I looked into it, I wasn't sure if it was assembly or manufacturing when they said it, because I know they assemble at least. I'm not sure if they manufacture the entire system there, if it's just the assembly.
okay. And Ben, you have a question?
Yeah, I just got my 12K installed and set up about 2 months ago. So I had asked Don some things about this a year ago when we were first exploring this. Don, have you done anything with the time of use setup for your batteries, as far as
I haven't. Yeah, to be honest, I've got the biggest system is the off-grid one. The other ones, couple on a farm, and those are just mainly for kind of outbuildings, but they're still on grid. I haven't really used the time of use at all, to be honest, because I do have batteries down there to keep them charged up just for an emergency. I just assume keep them charged up. I'm not going to save that much money, I don't think, at least in my situation.
Yeah.
By time of use.
Yeah, normally time of use is going to be something that deals with, time of use pricing issues
Right.
from the utility. So if you don't have that from the utility to try and minimize your cost by maximizing use when energy is cheaper. I don't know, Ben, is your situation? Do you have time of use pricing?
Well, no, the time of use I was more interested in had to do with how much of the grid I was using versus the batteries, because when the batteries get down to a low state of charge, switching over and pulling more from the grid, there's options in there to program at this time of day. You can use the batteries down to a certain percentage, and then that'll let you on a cloudy day borrow a little bit, but then use primarily overnight so that you're minimizing how much grid you're using. But I didn't know if you had figured out all that yet, or if you've got net metering. Maybe you don't
I've got net metering. It doesn't, if I overproduce in the daytime, I'm getting credit for it on a dollar for dollar basis. And I don't do, I'm not a manufacturing, so I don't need peak shaving to prevent the load charge or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, this is good that I've got two people, especially Ben, since you've just gone through this. Did you run into anything when you were installing it or procuring it that kind of came as unexpected to you? Did you run into any problems or issues?
Well, all of my problems were self-inflicted. I wanted to put my inverter inside the house. I just wanted to have my inverter inside the house. And because I elected to put it inside the house, then AEP, my utility, said, well, there has to be switches outside and there has to be a switch by the meter. And I went back and forth with them about what the code required. And ultimately, AEP, specifically, they have so many customers that do micro inverters or a power optimizer with a central inverter that sits outside, that they're accustomed to requiring an AC disconnect that they can turn off. And I said, but you don't really need an AC disconnect. You just need a disconnect, right? And so in their paperwork, it specifically lists AC, but when I talked with them on the phone, they were good with the DC. And so I had to put in a couple extra disconnect switches than what I should have had to. And the Sol-Ark, buying the all-in-one, it has all of those things built into it. Well, not if you put them in your house. Then you end up putting switches outside still.
Right.
But it was nice from the standpoint of having built-in breakers and having everything self-contained.
Yeah, I know that typically they do require the AC disconnect to be there, located within 10 feet of the meter, externally operable, clearly marked. And I've always thought, okay, this is a requirement of pretty much any PV system, but it seems rather redundant, because if they pull the meter, then they're going to be disconnecting anyway. That's one thing. But their argument would be, well, we don't necessarily need to pull the meter. We just want to shut down your system if we're working on the transformer or something like that. So we just want an easy, convenient way to just turn off any power generation system that might be nearby. Fair enough. They make the rules. So you kind of abide by it. But then if you do have battery backup of some sort, then you've got to have some sort of DC disconnect out there at the meter as well, because obviously you disconnect the AC, the system's designed to go into standalone mode, so now it's still operating, but they want that turned off as well. So usually now you've got to have an AC and a DC disconnect out by the meter, which is a bit harsh. But I agree with you, Ben. I don't much want a few $1,000s worth of equipment sitting right outside my house, where somebody with some wire cutters can come and walk off with it in about 5 minutes, So I'd much rather put it in a place where it's relatively protected. But
well, and we had discussed about moving things to the garage, but it really didn't make any sense to go to the garage. And I didn't want it out in the weather. I mean, that was the bigger thing for me. And I even at one point had debated about putting it out where the array is. I did a ground mount system. So I had debated on putting it out there and kind of building an enclosure to keep it in, and then running AC from there to the house. And I thought, well, maybe that would simplify things when I started getting into the weeds with some of the disconnect requirements. But ultimately we worked through that stuff and bought a couple of solar disconnect, the snap switches, and that solved the problem.
Okay. Anything else that came as a surprise? Was it easier, harder than you anticipated to hook up?
No, it wasn't any harder to hook up. There were times when, looking at all the parts and pieces, that buying it, I could have saved some money, I think, not buying the all-in-one. But I knew that I was buying an expensive inverter, and so the budget kind of went higher than I was initially planning. But I started by buying an expensive inverter, but I bought it for the sake of all the capabilities that it had. I can go into the settings and I can push limited to load or limited to home, and then it throttles back the PV to match what I'm using. And had even debated about not doing net metering or not doing an interconnection agreement with the utility. But then I wasn't making solar in the heat of the day because nobody was using any electricity. So there was all this opportunity, and I wasn't getting it. So the net metering or the batteries had to come along to actually get solar going. Otherwise, it was just making a little bit of production when it could have been making a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the features that I think Don had mentioned, that the Sol-Ark came from sort of a military application, and this is, to my knowledge, the only inverter that's EMT, EMF,
EMP Harden.
EMP.
It's for solar, either solar flares or for what do you call it?
Nuclear.
Nuclear, yeah. The EMP, the EMP itself, I guess.
It's for all those preppers like Don down in Kentucky.
Well, you have to. There's an upsell for that package. It doesn't come EMP hardened, but you can buy you can buy a more expensive version that has been EMP hardened. Yeah.
Really? Ah, okay. Well, that's interesting because they advertise themselves as EMP hardened. So, that's so many of you guys, and we've talked about this before where, you don't have to be a prepper. You're thinking that the world's about to end, but there are solar flares, large ones that occur that could knock out the grid, pretty readily. And here you've got your solar array and you're wanting to survive these kind of events that may take place. And then that one knocks you out along with everybody else just because you didn't have it hardened. So, all right, Don, did you run into anything that you were a little bit surprised by when you installed it?
No, nothing really with the inverter. I mean, with the some of the shutdown stuff we had for the ones that were grid tied, that was kind of a pain to get some of that stuff put in place. But the inverter itself was pretty straightforward. It's not too complicated. The diagram, you've got the diagram right there. It's pretty straightforward where you put everything. For the off-grid system, you just had to make sure you put if you have a generator, to put that into the grid as opposed to the generator setting. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, in fact, the diagram here that Don's referring to, this and anybody who's not, an electrician or used to working with diagrams of this sort, these one-line diagrams, something like this, you just look at it and run for cover because it looks pretty complicated, but it's really not. It looks to me anyway that you've got a place to install batteries. You just connect up to the battery ports. It has a couple of MPPT connection points, they call, but that's basically where you put your arrays, your strings. And this might be where they say you can have 2 strings in each of those. So Don, you and I were talking about that, where there's only 2 MPPT controllers, but there are 4 ports to connect in, so 2 for each. So you don't need a combiner box or a junction box for that. Our combiner, you're just going to be jumping in and connecting there. And the thing I found interesting in this, and we talked about it a little bit ahead of time here, is that even though this is an off-grid system, it's got a connection place for the grid. And what they want you to do is hook up your generator to the grid, right? That essentially your generator now becomes your grid backup. Is that right?
Right. I'd say I'd call them not off-grid systems, but grid agnostic. I'd say you can be on the grid. You can be on the grid with a generator. You can be on the grid with no generator. You can be off the grid with a generator, because they do have them set up to be either on grid or off grid with or without the generator.
And it also gives in this diagram, it says in one of those ports, in the generator port, you could also connect up AC coupled inverters. And you and I were sort of speculating what situation would that be. And what comes to my mind anyway is, let's say that you've got an N-phase microinverter system and you decide, I don't want to invest in all of the equipment that's associated with N-phase, with the $2,500 auto disconnect switch and the $500 communications and the N-phase proprietary batteries. I want battery backup. Well, you could hook into that system. You could just hook your array up in here and then essentially go standalone if you wanted to. So
yeah, they had a couple options in there actually, Jay. The one you were mentioning about putting the generator in the grid breaker would be if you were truly running standalone. And the reason for that is if you put your generator in the grid breaker, you can take the generator breaker and you can use it as a load dump. So you can turn that into a place to run excess for like a water heater or something like that. So by having the generator in the grid breaker, you have that capability. It's the only one that has that unique capability, is the generator breaker.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I did see in their system that they've got optimizers too, or something, or module level power electronics. Did you guys install those on your panels as well for this system?
That's if you had to do a rapid shutdown for your installation. They're already compatible with those Tigos.
Oh, okay. All right. So basically what that means, if you're not familiar, is the NEC base requires that for occupied buildings, if you put the array on the roof, You've got to be able, when you turn off the system, the power shuts off at the panel. So Tygo is a manufacturer that has some of these module level power electronics that basically shut off the power at the panel rather than at the inverter, so that you don't have any live lines running through your house once the system has been shut down. Don, did you have something to add?
Two things. One, I was going to say, with one of the systems we put in, the Tygo was the only thing that was complicated. We put those in, and what's the word? The thyroids, the little circle things.
The toroids, yeah.
Toroids, yes. I'm sorry, the toroids. Those are kind of a pain in the neck to get them to work correctly and to make sure you had them around. And I don't understand it, but once we did it, it worked. You had to put the toroid around the wires inside the system to make sure it communicated with the toroid, with the shutdowns that were actually at the panels. So it worked, but that was the only glitch we had putting one system in. The other thing I was going to mention was, it reminded me when Ben said it, with the load dump. I believe these systems, at least some of them, I know one of mine has it, that you can set it up for a wind turbine, not just a solar panel. And that was the issue that they had initially, was that they didn't have a load dump, and they put in later versions of the inverter the capacity to have the load dump for the wind turbine.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because when solar panels are generating, but you don't have a load, nothing bad happens because they don't produce. But if you've got a wind turbine and it's kicking out power, it's got to go somewhere. And if you're not connected to the grid, it's got to go to a dump. And often it could be a hot water heater, which would be useful. But I've seen them where they just hook up to a whole bank of resistors, and they're essentially just heating the great outdoors like a giant toaster, just in case, you know, they're in a situation. And this was a grid tied system, but it's possible the wind turbine could be generating, the grid could be down, and you don't want to fry out everything. So you've got to dissipate that power somehow. So all right. Yeah, I wonder if those little whatever you guys call them, toroids, or you know, are simply current transformers, you know, like CTs that are measuring. If they wrap around the wire, they must be measuring current, I would imagine. That.
But were they hooked to any wires, Don, or were they just the steel rings?
They were just the steel rings. That was the crazy part. I don't know enough about electricity to understand why, but once we put the wires through them, then the shutdowns worked. But before that, even I had two electricians out there with me, and they couldn't figure out why that would have anything to do with it. But it worked.
Probably somebody on here that knows, but it sounds like there's some kind of an insulating mechanism. So that was my understanding of it, because I had to put my battery cables through them too.
Okay, well, that'll be interesting.
It could be a noise filter also.
Oh, because it is a communication device, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay. All right. Well, I thought the last thing I would just point out, and you guys, especially since you just bought some of this stuff, Ben, is that I wanted to throw some prices out, because it never makes a lot of sense to me until you start looking at what are these actually costing. And I pulled up just a couple here. This off-grid, this is the 5 kW. Looks like you can get a battery and a inverter. So just those two items for about $6,000. Since it says that you're adding if you add another 5 kW kilowatt hour battery, it's going to add another 3,000. So I'm assuming it's like 3 and 3 for each of those. So it sounds to me like the 5 kW inverter is around $3,000. They sell some kits. Ben, is this like the kit you said you bought, where you got a lot of extra stuff for your system?
No. What I did was I just bought the components I needed. I bought my panels and my 12K at the same time. And I was going to tell you that I ended up getting my stuff from Northern Arizona, and I bought my Sol-Ark 12K on sale, and I actually got it last year, but I didn't get my stuff installed, and I paid $6,100 for it. And this year that 12K was selling for $5,100. So it dropped in price by $1,000. Yeah.
Well, at least it's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So what did your whole system cost? Do you mind sharing that, or do you?
Well,
Is it a secret. Your
ultimately,
wife's going to find out.
no. Ultimately, I've put in 4.5 kilowatts of panels, and I've put in 10 kilowatt hours of battery storage, the 12K, the wiring, the conduit. And I've got a 200-foot run from where my Sol-Ark is to where my solar array is. And I've changed some panel things, but I've jacked the price up to now I'm at $20,000.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you know, I'll tell you that I just installed a 5 kW N-phase system similarly, you know, a good distance, about 200 feet. And it ended up costing me about $22,000 with no battery. So, so don't feel horrible that you overpaid, because these systems, when you start putting in battery backup, mine's sunlight backup, but they can get pricey. So
How many KW did you say that one was?
it's about 5 kW.
5 KW. Okay.
Yeah.
Similar.
So it's a solar carport. We ended up doing a couple of things that added to the price. Like we put a sub panel out there at the garage where it's located and things like that. But still, I mean, every time I turned around, it was costing more and more and more. For the wire was, oh my gosh, you know, you just start looking at that just for the wire, you got to take out a mortgage. So Don, what was your experience? Well, you're an accountant, so you probably got a deal, right?
I got some of it cheaper than average. I would tell you what it is. I can't even remember because it's been a couple of years now, and the pricing would be out of date anyway.
Mhm.
But the system I had was let's see, the ones I remember. One was a 12K, one was a 7.5, and one is 22, 23, somewhere in that ballpark. 21, I think it's a 22. And then two of them were on roof. One of them is ground mounted. And I will say, I only bought the Sol-Ark itself from Sol-Ark. The rest of them I went and got from, I think, Renview for one set. I think I went to Aldi one time, Renview a couple times.
Mhm.
And, you know, the Renview I liked better, I'll be honest. But that had more to do with the people there than the product, probably all the same product.
Okay. So Ben, did you install it yourself, or does that price include a installation company?
No, I was totally self-installed.
Oh, okay. So that's really just product then.
Yeah.
Boom. Yeah. So I was just trying to come up with a rough rule of thumb for a standalone system. It sounds like about $4 a watt, you know, sounds about reasonable for the product with the batteries and everything.
Yeah, and you know, the solar panels, I bought NPeak 2s from REC. And they have real good production. They've got real good warranty, like 90 something percent at 25 years because of that special boron blocking. I used to know more about it when I first was researching them, but the price of the panels was almost 85 cents a watt, I want to say.
Mm.
And you know, you can do a lot better than that on panels. So there's some savings to be had there.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of this discussion. Does anybody, Don or Ben, do you want anything you want to add about your experience with this? Anything at all?
Nothing in particular.
Okay. All right. Well, I thank you guys for joining, and I'll throw it open to the rest of the group. Anybody else have anything you want to bring up before we call this to a close? Okay, well, not hearing anything. I appreciate all of your attention, and we'll see you again next Tuesday. All right. Take care. Thanks.